Kate Falcher, welcome to Irish Granny Helen. Welcome back. If you watched video number 1 of this topic, I hope you did. This is pretty interesting stuff, I think. Welcome if you're a new subscriber. You never know what you're going to get. Welcome if you're a returning subscriber. I'm very grateful that you guys stick around for this stuff. So let's get right down to it. I promised you David Icke. Going to give you David Icke. And if you don't know who David Icke is, well, I don't know if you're lucky or not. I'm not sure. I used to read him avidly. I had a bunch of his books, and they're, obsessive compulsive. They're crazy. But times have changed. So we were discussing different theories, modern theories about the nature of consciousness and our existence on the planet. And just very quickly to go over it, this modern version believes that we're in a prison planet. We're being held prisoner by malign interdimensional entities or by technology of some sort, that it's all an illusion, and that we're held here in a trap of reincarnation for them to feed off our negative emotions of fear and guilt, et cetera, et cetera. That there's no real voluntary spirituality. You're not going to get out of it because you lead a really good life or whatever. And there are varying degrees of this. So several proponents of it. This is the prison planet theory. And probably the loudest voice, the most influential. There are people on the internet that they're the ones I discovered, which led me down this rabbit hole. I would advise being really cautious about who you listen to on this topic, because having done a deeper dive into their full backgrounds, I would say look within. I really would. I would advise look within. Don't turn to complete strangers like that for guidance, because, well, we'll talk about it, but I think they are instilling a degree of paranoia about our existence here that is really not, it's not right. So let's talk about David Icke. Now, he's very famous for all these huge books he's written. Reincarnation Trap, Prison Planet. So this is what he believes. Now, the archons are these, I guess you could equate them to the Sumerian hybrid gods that were ruling the world at one point, or the Greek and Roman gods who, sent their children down to torture us. They're powerful entities from elsewhere who keep us in a matrix of coercive control. So David Icke believes we're trapped in that we are infinite consciousness, but we're trapped in a biological simulation. Now, I'm going to interrupt my discussion of David Icke, and because it's hard to remember everything as we go along. There's so much to talk about. And I just like to point out that not a lot of difference between that and the many, many religious beliefs and philosophies that say we're an infinite consciousness attached to the physical world from a lack of understanding that we are not our bodies. We are not the material. It's a biological simulation. They believe that these entities are parasitic, they're not human, they trick us after death to reincarnate, and they feed off our negative emotion. Well, that's not far from what the Tibetans believe, the Tibetan Buddhists and Hindus, and to a certain extent the Gnostics. I think the intentional feeding of our negative emotions, I don't know if that matters. I think that's just keeping us attached to the physical world. David Icke says they are reptilians or the Anunnaki. Well, like I said, the Sumerian is not Sumerian. Life on Earth is purposefully difficult to keep us in a state of fear, trauma, low vibration, to provide the negative energy for them. That reincarnation is a trap in the physical world of our spiritual consciousness. And at death, the light that we see is a trick of these entities. It acts like a magnet. It draws us like a moth to the flame, is what he says. And it's to get us into that tunnel. And that tunnel is to wipe our memories so that we re-enter the cycle of physical incarnation. So their advice is to break the cycle, don't go to the light. But this whole thing is predicated on fear. This whole thing is not predicated on don't be distracted. It's like, oh my God, the fear. His advice is be aware of your true nature. Okay, that's good advice. Refuse the memory wipe. That's where it's getting, okay. And project your consciousness beyond the simulation. This is a modern rewording of what everybody else has said. The Gnostics said this. The Tibetan Buddhists said it. The Hindus said it. The Egyptians said it. Everybody said it. And somehow we're supposed to spend big bucks on big books written by these guys that say the exact same thing, but there's an element of, you know, that Christian Satan, the demon, is always breathing down our necks and out to get us and willing to trick us. And there's that same sense that there's big bad entities just licking their chops to make our lives awful and keep us here and to torture us. We're supposed to understand our true nature while we're alive and be able to remain aware after death so we won't be tricked. They all say this. This is nothing new. Another proponent of the prison planet theory is a guy called Wes Penray, I think is how he says it. The Wes Penray Papers. Earth is a prison planet. Excuse me. ETs control the experiment. After death, there's an attempt to recapture consciousness that has escaped the physical by the process of death. And that the astral plane is really a software program, virtual reality. I don't even really know what that means. I think, this is where I feel they're using reference to modern technology and reference to UFO alien lore. And I'm not saying it's not real. I'm just saying that they're using those stories. That's what lore is, stories. Because people don't want to identify with the old philosophy or the old religion or the old belief system, because we're all modern and free thinking. But look, these technical guys that we all just worship, they're saying that there are reptilians out there controlling us with their software. I mean, that's another form of distraction. I think it's another way of distracting us and turning us from the truth of the matter. The truth of the matter is quit looking out there and start looking within. Spend time in contemplation. Turn the noise off. Spend time in prayer, if that's your thing. Meditation, if that's your thing. Mindfulness, in other words, think about what you're doing. Think about what your purpose is and why you're here. And don't make these other things, don't give them an importance they don't have, because they're not even a factor if you've lived a life of service and love, if you've lived a life of trying to be aware of who you are and to understand your soul. They're irrelevant. Then there's this guy called Preston Nichols. Now, he was all about the Montauk Project. I did the Montauk Project a long time ago. It's about what's it called? Transporting people across distances instantly, and time travel also. So he claims there is a technological manipulation of consciousness. Well, yeah, we see that in kids who spend 24 hours a day in front of devices. That life is an artificial simulation designed to control human spiritual development. That's another way of saying that we're so attached to the material world that we don't devote the time and attention that our true nature deserves. That's all they're saying. They're trying to make it scary. Their claim is the afterlife is artificial. I would say that in the same way that the physical world is an illusion, what we think we know about the afterlife is an illusion, because we don't really know, because we're still alive. People who come back from near-death experiences have experienced just this huge panoply of different things. But what do we know of those things? They don't know. They all claim they're not entirely sure. They get messages. They have some understanding, some degree of understanding, way more than we do. But there are still many unknowns and questions about what they saw and what happened to them. And I put that in the same, this is me now. I'm, what do I know? I put them in the same category as the distractions, the illusions, the bells and whistles that keep us not thinking about who we really are and what we're supposed to really be doing. So I found this really interesting article, and it actually was like a 500-page research thing. And I read they usually put a summary at the beginning, and the summary was pages and pages and pages long, but it was really interesting. I skipped over the technical, this is how we collected our data points, that kind of stuff that bores me. And I got down to the meat of the issue. And it's called Modern Ethical and Psychological Opinions About Near-Death Experiences. There's another title here, but this is all part of this thing. Ethical and psychological opinions about near-death experiences are independent of one's belief system. There's a whole way of looking at these experiences that raise questions that are universal for people. There are ethical and psychological implications to presenting these notions of death and life after death and near-death experiences, and we should be addressing those. I will argue, and I will continue to argue as we go along, that we should also be asking these questions about mainstream religions and belief systems. But that's just me. So let's talk about the ethical things. So in regards to the concept of trapping the soul, what about consent? And at first I thought that was a little bit funny. I thought, oh, okay. But as I read, it got more interesting. And they raised this question. If consciousness survives physical death, the issue of consent of the soul arises. Do souls even have the right to decide their own options? Okay, so we're stipulating that, okay, your soul lives after you die. Consciousness exists after death of the body. But then what? Who's in charge? So the next issue, and we have no answers here. We're raising questions. The next issue is about manipulation. After death, a consciousness would be inherently susceptible and vulnerable to manipulation and coercion, because there's confusion, there's uncertainty, there's fear, there's whatever indoctrination you bring with you, life experience. You are very vulnerable. It's like being the new kid at school on the first day, and you just really don't know where to go, don't know what to do. That leaves you open to manipulation. That's an ethical question. And so if we're talking about supreme beings and divinities and all perfect energies, these questions should be asked and answered. What about autonomy, free will? Does the soul have the absolute right after death to choose its own fate? Can it opt for non existence? Can it take choices that liberate it from reincarnation completely? Or can it opt for rebirth? Like what, how much autonomy will, free will does the soul have? Then there's spiritual sovereignty. Does the soul have the right to self-determination? Who's in charge? How about individual spiritual rights versus potential cosmic or systemic purposes of reincarnation? Maybe there's a larger purpose for reincarnation that we are yet to understand. That question needs to be answered. And are there ethical obligations to free trapped souls? And we sit here and talk about it. Well, it's happening to other people. Are we only going to be worried about it when it happens to ourselves, like, oh, so many people about, oh, so many issues these days? In short, who owns the soul? Can it be owned? Should it be owned? Is the word owned even appropriate in this context? What agency does the individual soul have? What about, now these are questions that I thought about. They weren't in the article, but I thought, what about natural law? What about universal law, the Hermetic principles? There's the law of polarity, the law of cause and effect. Is there the law of that's my soul, take your hands off of it? I mean, it's good questions, right? So soul entrapment is a huge challenge to religious beliefs. You betcha. Religions, they have strong opinions about afterlife destinations or divine benevolence. They don't agree with each other. They don't agree with sects of the same religious belief, ostensibly. The prison planet theory challenges the authority and the doctrines of many belief systems. So, for example, the potential for extraterrestrial, reptilian, afterlife deception. Well, okay, that really challenges the concept of divine love and salvation. And, that doctrine of God sent his only son and he died to save us. And that whole belief system is foundational to most branches of Christianity, not all. And the question that needs to be asked is, you present somebody who's all in on that Christian doctrine, and you tell them that reptilian ETs are going to torture them after death so that they'll be afraid and then return them to life on planet Earth. I don't think that'll be well received. I don't know. That's just me. Do soul entrapment theories increase death anxiety? Now, I thought this was a hilarious question. Because if we're going to ask that, why are we not asking, there's an ethical dilemma here with organized religion that teaches eternal hellfire? To me, that question just jumped out. I mean, come on. Who at some point in Western culture hasn't had to face the thought of roasting in hell for eternity because they ate that meat on Friday? Do prison planet theories create spiritual nihilism, hopelessness, despair, because afterlife options are limited or deceptive? Well, you could say that about all religions. I mean, all of them that we talked about warned that there was some form of bad juju, not good place, angry angels, suffering hell, whatever you want to call it. Uh, what's different? I mean, why isn't everybody living in a constant state of despair then? So the ethical questions are legitimate, but I think they ought to be asked a whole lot more often. That's just my opinion. Well, let's look at the psychological implications. So, to create a belief in general, there's a lot of psychological maneuvering that goes on. Um, you live within a culture, and you have the human psychology, psychological makeup, and you're externally exposed in your culture as a person to these belief systems, whatever they are, the prison planet. There are some tendencies in human psychological makeup that would predispose you to falling for this. I think we're getting very close to the concept of mind control and propaganda. We're kind of in that basic area. So there's confirmation bias, pattern recognition, cultural conditioning, media programming, community pressure, the influence of authority figures, because of course they have the most to lose. If these theories of life after death all say the same thing, which is, except for the prison planet, which is we're trapped in a cycle of reincarnation by our own attachment to the material world. But if we look within and we try to educate ourselves as to what we really are, infinite beings of consciousness, sparks of the divine, if we fully absorb that and understand that, turn our backs on this enormous attachment to the material world, well, the capitalists are not going to like that, and the authoritarians are not going to like that, and the clergy is not going to like that, because the message here is you save your own soul. You break the cycle of reward and punishment, reincarnation, and recycling back. You move on to, I don't know, you can call it whatever you want to call it. You go to the source, you go to the light of the spirit, you go to your heavenly reward, you go to the world hereafter, whatever you want to call it. It doesn't depend on the priests and the bishops and the preachers and the rabbis and all of those authority figures. It doesn't depend on the Pope. It doesn't depend on the patriarch, is the the Eastern Orthodox big shot. It's your responsibility, and you find it within. Well, that's a real threat to authority. So to be fair, if we're so concerned that these factors come into play in convincing people about the truth of a prison planet, most theories, and okay, and that whole idea that the afterlife is, a cycle back into reincarnation, shouldn't we drill down into the same psychological factors and more that are involved in maintaining the faith, the doctrine of religious groups? Shouldn't we get real about this? What about the coercion and the loss of autonomy and the fear and the guilt and the despair? And that's not to say that people don't get benefits from those things. Sure they do. But what about those ethical questions and those psychological questions? So let's talk a little bit about near-death experiences, because we really haven't talked a lot about it. What are they? I would say they're very close brush with the afterlife. And there's a wide variety of experience, but there's also an enormous amount of similarity. It's very interesting. So they're affected by culture. If you're having a near-death experience and it's happening in, say, oh, I don't know, Alabama, you might see Jesus. And if you're having it in Mumbai, you might see, I don't know, Vishnu. I don't know which god you would see. Rama? I don't know. If you were having it in Islam, you would expect to see either good angels or bad angels, and they carry you off depending. A lot of people see relatives, friends. Is that legit? I don't know. I don't know. So, commonalities. Now, these are not ubiquitous. In other words, every single person who has a near-death experience does not experience exactly this thing, but they happen often enough in most of them that they're worthy of mention. And the first is an out-of-body experience. Now, it's interesting to know that, like many people who are in terrible accidents, they don't really experience the accident. It's like their soul leaves their body before the cars crash or before the thing explodes. They find themselves out of body, looking back at their body, looking back at the cars all crunched up, or looking back at whatever the situation is. And it's interesting that everybody that has this experience doesn't fully recognize their own body. Takes them a while to process, oh, I'm looking at myself, and oh, that's me. Often, not always, often they're greeted by loved ones or familiar beings or angels, or sometimes they'll get right down to the religious stuff. And like I said, if you're a Christian, you'll see Jesus or Mary or whatever. But anyway, it doesn't always happen. This seems the most common is a feeling of overwhelming love. Not always. There are some people who have negative experiences for near-death experiences. We'll talk about that in a minute. But feelings of overwhelming love, and then they see this really bright light. Sometimes it grows, and sometimes it's bright right away. And sometimes they'll see a tunnel, but not always. Sometimes they'll find themselves in a field of flowers or a beautiful pasture, something like that, a garden. And at some point in this moment, they'll have a life review, and it's just their whole life flashes in front of their eyes. They see everything they've ever been through, and they feel it from the perspective of the people with whom they were interacting. So if you call somebody a name in real life, you'll see that happen in your real life review, but you'll also feel what that did to the person inside. You might have conversations with, as I said, loved ones or guardian angels or friends, family, figures of wisdom like a sage of some sort. And eventually you're given the decision to stay or go. Now, they get the decision because they came back. Maybe the people who don't come back don't get the decision. We don't know. We don't know. Can psychological mechanisms explain near-death experiences? So scientists have looked at these. They've studied them exhaustively. They don't all agree, but they think, well, so what could it be? But if you're not really experiencing what you think you're experiencing, what's happening here? Trauma-induced dissociation, false memories, Jungian archetypical patterns that explain cross-cultural near-death experience similarities. All those words to just say that all people have the same types of heroes and villains floating around somewhere in their psyches, And that's why people in China and people in Italy might have very similar near-death experiences. Is it brain chemicals that affect neurological function, which affects psychology? We don't know. So all of this stuff so far that we talked about, like ethics and the mechanics of it and all, this comes from that study. The tunnel of light and the soul trap hypotheses, a multidisciplinary analysis of near-death experiences and afterlife theories. So half the book is the title. This is by 3 people. I just wrote their last name down: Landy, Garcia, and Mayo. And one is a consciousness studies researcher, one is an esotericist, and one is a religious scholar. And it's a very interesting article. I mean, you can get it PDF, right? But that's a little too much. So what does science say? Now, science has a lot to say. And if you ask a doctor, there's a 50-50 chance the doctor is either going to fully believe you. Yes, I believe your near-death experience. There's something going on here we can't explain. And it's just as likely you'll get a doctor who needs to go play golf and doesn't want to talk about it. They have not come to terms with anything like that in their own lives. They can't handle your issues, But there are doctors who've studied it. We've done some of their books. We should do them again. Let me know if that's what you'd like me to do. The brain can be artificially stimulated to experience mystical experiences, out-of-body experiences, and then there's the whole microdosing, hallucinogenic type things that's new, right? Well, everything old is new again. Virtual reality can be quite convincing. Brain-computer interfaces, they're working on those. They have a lot to say. They're learning more than they understood before about the brain. The mainstream authority about this is that your consciousness, like who you are, what you see, is a product of the function of your brain. And it controls your body, controls your interactions, controls your feelings and your thoughts, basically. And then there are those who believe the opposite. You are not your brain, you're your consciousness. Your consciousness, I can't say it, is independent, really, of your brain. It's an energy field that you cart around, and you are the energy field that your body carts around. And your brain is a tool that's used to translate between that energy field that is you and the rest of the material world. So theoretically, science is working towards a future that can do things like upload and download consciousness here and there, holographic projections of consciousness, interdimensional travel, microchips in the brain. I mean, it's, we won't even get into the cryopreservation world. I think there are questions that are begging to be asked. Why or how do some people remember their past life in this life, and they carry scars of their previous death? And we have done books that talk about this, where somebody will say, there's a kid in a nearby village who claims he was murdered by his brother-in-law, and he has the bullet wounds to show for it from a past life. And sure enough, they'll take this child to the doctor, and the doctor will say, well, that's what it looks like. We know this child never was shot, so explain it. How about descriptions that people give of when they're out of body? They have 360-degree vision, which I can't describe because I don't fully understand it, other than to say, very much like my mother, you develop eyes in the back of your head. What about people who have out-of-body experiences, their near-death experiences, and they find themselves on the other side of the planet, driving in the backseat of a car with a relative who has no idea that they're dead, and the relative is having a conversation with somebody. And when that person returns to the world, they can narrate that conversation. That happens all the time. It's really weird. How do they know about people, activities, conversations that are so far from the location of their physical body? So let's talk about some of these similarities. I tried to make this as abbreviated as I could, and it was just really difficult. So I thought, I'm just going to go over it, and it doesn't hurt to repeat things. So in Egypt, you're led by Osiris, your soul is weighed, you're greeted by gods and guides, you're led down the path to your next life. And how do you prepare for this? It's how you live your life right now. You adhere to traditions, to moral code. So those are some of the standard beliefs. In the Tibetan Buddhism, the guides can be both good and bad, peaceful and wrathful. But you need to know your true nature. You need to know about the light, because everything you experience after death is a product of your mind and your fears and your expectations, which are all attachments to the physical world. So we have that same through line. You need to detach from the physical world emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, recognize your spiritual true being, and then not to be afraid because you have let go of the fear. Prepare in life by learning to recognize the light, learning your soul consciousness, and you do that with meditation and mindfulness and how you treat people. And then when you die, you merge with the light. So you go to the light. You are the light. In Judaism, after death, you join with the divine if you've had a good life. And if not, then you go elsewhere. And so where you go depends on how you live your life. It's about ethical behavior in this lifetime. Very straightforward. In Islam, after death, you go to the divine light of the universe. You can be waylaid by tricksters, and you'll be carried off by good or your soul, by good or bad angels, depending on how you've lived. Same with Native Americans. You're guided by ancestors. You are reuniting with the light of the spirit world. You have to watch out for tricksters. And life, how you live your life, prepares you to deal with this. Same with the Vedic belief system, the path of light, where you don't get trapped in the cycle of reincarnation, depends on your behavior, your choices, your attachment to the physical world. The path of darkness is you have not broken that attachment, you did not make good ethical choices, you don't fully understand your divine nature. Plato, reincarnation comes because you're too attached to the physical world. And after death, where you go depends on what you have done in life. The wicked have punishment, then they reincarnate to learn better. Good souls still are affected by their physical existence. They, if that's true, they will reincarnate, but they're making progress. Virtuous souls who have detached completely from the physical, they end the cycle of reincarnation and they unite with the divine, which brings us to the Gnostics, who want you to detach from the physical, go to the divine, be one with the light. It's possible to be distracted on the path. The demiurge can trap souls, but it's all about allowing yourself to be distracted by the physical. The goal is to unite with the light gnosis, to understand what you are, who you are. And then we come to these contemporary young philosophical geniuses who believe that they've discovered something new. All they've done is put a technological shine on it. That's my opinion. After really thinking about this and studying up on it, uh, they believe we're trapped in reincarnation. Well, so does everybody else. I mean, all thought processes, all belief systems, but we do it ourselves. And I think there are trickster spirits. How much of that is of our own making? How much of everything that happens to us is of our own making, I think, is the real question. These malicious entities that come from another planet and like our negative energy. Well, the way that we prevent that is to not be fearful and not to be guilt-ridden and to try to make good decisions, to recognize that life on earth is really an illusion to distract us from our spiritual path. And reincarnation, they believe, is forced recycling. I don't think it's forced recycling. I think it's choosing. It's the choices we make. And David, I have some, legitimate things to say that you have to know yourself. You have to refuse to follow the tricksters. In other words, make good choices. Don't be distracted by fear or whatever. The process of life is for evolving yourself spiritually, and life is an illusion. If he wants to call it a simulation, fine, but it's an illusion, Maya. So a summary of the features of the afterlife experience. There's a blinding light of spirit. You're being greeted by gods or loved ones. You might be deceived by tricksters. You have a review of your life, which is not judgment, but about learning. The destination that you eventually end up in is determined by your spiritual development. Understanding of consciousness as divine and an ethical life will determine the path that you take after life, and it may break the reincarnation cycle. Poor life choices or a lack of spiritual awareness, they lead to a path of rebirth. If you don't want to be trapped in that, then you make better choices. We need to detach from our identity with the physical and embrace an understanding that the soul is the light. It's a part of the divine source. Consciousness is infinite. Consciousness is independent of the material world. Consciousness evolves with an ethical life and the development of spiritual understanding, which is the purpose of physical life. If you don't do that hard work, then you reincarnate because you have to do that hard work. Poor life choices lead to a lack of awareness, an attachment to the physical, and that includes an inability to subdue negative emotions like fear and guilt, and that will bring about rebirth to amend that inability. Fear, negative emotions are an attachment to the physical world. And I'll give a perfect example of which I am very guilty. I am extremely concerned about what goes on in the larger world. And I'm coming to an understanding that, how do I say this? Awareness is necessary, but nothing beyond that we really need to be working on ourselves. That doesn't mean ignoring the rest of the world. It means doing good in the rest of the world, but for a spiritual purpose. It's such a fine line. And it's very difficult because we're human to see the world as it is and not to have certain kind of feelings about it. It's what we do with those feelings that matters. So the goal here, it's unity with the light, the source. So, should we go to the light or should we not go to the light? The general lesson in all of this is that we all need to encounter death with the understanding that our consciousness is infinite and we have to see beyond the misdirection. That's it in a nutshell. Does that mean you go to the light or you don't? Some religions say yes, some say no. what you do is you don't focus on all of that. You focus on who you are. And our purpose is to rejoin the source because we are the light. The light is in us. And our job is to live a life of love and service, to educate ourselves about the true nature of the human soul through meditation, mindfulness, prayer, acts of service, love, compassion. Learn there is nothing to fear and be ready to embrace the light, whatever that means. At death, don't be distracted by anything. Know what you are and go to the light of your soul. Know that you're looking at the light of your soul. And I'm going to end this with a little prayer. And I do believe I learned this prayer when I first started my channel. I heard Marianne say this, Marianne of Revealing Light Tarot. This stuck with me. I hope I remember it correctly. I may have tweaked it incorrectly, but I know that this is the message. So she has said this little prayer before, and I think this is a good reminder. This is something to keep in the back of your mind, just to remind yourself. So this is how it goes. I am the light. The light is in me. The light moves through me. The light surrounds me. The light protects me. I am the light. The end. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope that was helpful. I hope it was somehow reassuring and thought-provoking. And I want some of those ethical questions answered on a much larger scale than just in the context of near-death experiences. And I do have an experiencer coming. We have it on the calendar, so fingers crossed. Stay tuned. Thank you very much for watching. Slanga foil. Slancha.